this special rules committee meeting to order. Let's go ahead and start with introductions. Folks in the room, starting with Meg.
Meg Salazar.
Pete Peterson.
Felix Rivera.
Christopher Constant.
And then on the phone, just to confirm, Crystal.
Here.
Suzanne Lewis.
Here.
Forrest Dunbar.
Here.
And Jamie Allen.
Here.
Awesome. Do we have any other assembly members on the phone? Okay, I know Austin's running a little bit late, so she'll be joining us soon. So for folks on the phone, if you want to get in the queue, please text me. And then, as normal, these Rules Committee meetings, informal in terms of communication, Mr. Chair, yada yada. Okay, so today we have 1 hour to review and discuss the implementation of rankings and talk about next steps and hear about some proposals from the administration. We've talked through a lot of these over the last few weeks, so I don't want us to rehash prior discussions. I want us to be pretty decisive and quick with our conversations today. So first, did folks get a chance to review the compilation that was emailed out to everyone earlier this morning?
Yes.
I'm seeing some yeses. Folks on the phone, did everyone get a chance to look it over? Okay, I'm going to assume those are all yeses. So I'm going to go ahead and move us on. So first, let's start with pillars of work. Hold on. Oh, great. Thanks, Crystal. Okay, so with pillars of work. So for this ranking, I just wanted to get the pulse of the members again on what is most important to them, especially as the administration puts forward some of their proposals working with assembly members. That's okay. Yeah, that's not yeah, that's fine. Especially as the administration puts forward some of their proposals working with assembly members on usage of the money. We'll hear a little bit about that later today. As a recap, at a prior meeting, we had this similar discussion. It was just framed differently. And during that discussion, the general feeling of the room was that we should phase the spending with about 30 to 40 million being allocated in the sort of immediate or urgent, as we framed it, category. From my reading of the rankings, I think we are still on the same page with members concerned about the immediate needs in the community. By and large, at least the way I see it, these items won't necessarily be sort of ranked in this fashion when we present them to the public. As some have noted, there's a lot more nuance to them than just ranking these four in any specific kind of order. So, any discussion on that? Oh, and I see we're joined by Mr. Weddleton on the phone. John, you're there?
I'm here.
Awesome, thank you.
Me too, Felix and Chris.
Okay, just want to note we've been joined by Austin Davidson. All right, so go ahead and start with Chris.
Thank you. So the way that the form worked out, I ended up filling it out twice because filling out the way the instructions said didn't make any sense to me, but I didn't want to be that guy who didn't do it how I was instructed. And so my alternative proposal was essentially that there are a number of priorities that are number one to me, and then some that are less than number one, right? And so in terms of the context of how we approach these, to me, the immediate needs are no different than the needs of the municipality. They're the same exact priority. We need to cover both of those expenses. And really, the transformative ones are similarly one. The future ones, fine, future, we'll figure those out when we get there. And in other examples, I just had a series of number ones and then a bunch of number twos. It's like yes now and yes later. So for me, that was what I had to do to address these, was to do it both ways. So Mr. Rivera has my responses to those in the order that I think was more accurate than this framing. But this is a great tool. And what I think it shows us is that we do have alignment across many domains. And I would ask the chair to define for us what he means by institutional, because
we're getting there.
Clearly that most of us didn't know what that meant.
Yeah, we're going to get there.
All right.
Meg.
Thank you. So I somewhat agree with Chris, and one of the ones I guess I wanted to highlight in terms of the categories being a little bit confusing, or is we have this municipal category, but that offer an extended payment plan for property taxes. If we're honestly going to consider that, it's immediate because of just pure timing. So I don't know. I didn't have a sense of how we could like dually rank them, or if we could kind of put a like also this one. Because it is a municipal issue, but then it's also an immediate issue. So that was one that really stuck out to me as one that just doesn't seem to, it could get lost, I guess, if it really does have a time sensitivity.
Yeah, and I guess, thanks for bringing that up. So I will say, in the comments section, these are all comments that the members added, and the way that I see them a lot are sort of tactics or that are going to be worked out, implemented, thought through when we do a lot of the work in the working group. So so this offering extended payment plan, right? That's same thing with someone else talked about Firewise work. Someone else talked about childcare vouchers. All of these things, I think folks put them in here because they thought of them in, this is the immediate category, this is the transformative category, this is in future, this is in municipal. A lot of these, though, as Chris stated, also fit in childcare. And in childcare, you're going to have some immediate stuff, you're going to have some transformative stuff, you're going to have some future stuff. All of these sort of layer and work with each other in that way. I think for me, we're going to get to the working group stuff here in a minute, which I think we'll talk a little bit more about that. So any other discussion on sort of the overarching pillars of work? Not seeing any texts from folks? Okay, so pillars of work. So this next ranking, which I called working groups, this is, I think, one where we present sort of in a particular order based on our thinking. And I can tell you that I've had constituents sort of asking on any of these particular ones, what are you thinking? How high of a priority is this going to be? So before we have any discussion, I think there were some questions about the institutional supports, which is something that I added at Crystal's request at the last Rules Committee meeting. So Crystal, can you explain what you meant by institutional supports?
Oh, that's funny, Felix. I don't remember asking for that. I think one of the comments that I made was that some of the information we've gotten from some of our speakers during our roundtables was that we had to make sure that we didn't lose businesses or organizations, or, I think I gave the example of the zoo. We didn't want to lose things that we may never get back if they manage to just fall away right now. So I suspect in that sense it maybe might be considered an institutional thing, but I don't really remember asking for something specific to something institutional. So anyway, you can take that as you will, but again, it was just the idea of trying to figure out how we could protect losing things that we may never get back once it's gone.
Got it. Well, thank you for that clarity, because as you can see, that one, at least for the people who did rank it, and there were some folks who didn't rank it, did get ranked last. But I think what you're asking for is something that can be incorporated into some of the other items. So as folks can see, here are the rankings that we came up with. Are there any discussions just based on the rankings that folks had? Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, no, negative.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
Seeing how the rankings with the comments there, and now knowing that what is meant by institutional, I guess the workforce development one that I kind of put forward, and then seeing that there's like these other development type programs, where someone's got a lens for development for housing, business, and food. I think there could maybe be some room for shift there. It really what you're talking. I don't know if by development we're talking about development of system capacity or what, but what I suggest
interesting that food ranked as number 2. I mean, I want to make sure everyone has food. We've heard pretty robustly food bank is having the biggest year they've ever had before in terms of money coming. And so I want us to be really conscientious of how we approach these so we aren't filling buckets that are full, but instead are filling buckets that are empty. And to the point of the workforce development for social service capacity, I think we have to be very careful in one way. And that is, if we're using these dollars to pay for workforce increases, we are setting folks up for a real shock when the money goes away. And so we have to be really careful about influencing that marketplace from the workforce side. And we're under the process of the waiver changing right now. And so most of the people who are doing the work are finding themselves for the first time in 2 generations able to pay for the work. And so I would offer we should, looking at those categories, look very carefully at areas that aren't fundable through those various sources. And we should be careful not to create shocks in the system where we raise them up and then crash them down.
Thanks. Crystal?
Thanks, Felix. I just want to echo what Chris is saying, that, that's my concern too, is I think we all have our priorities, but at the same time, I don't know who else is filling the buckets that need to be filled. And I guess that would be my comment to go along with what I said about, the potential for losing something like the zoo or the Performing Arts Center or whatever, you name it. If there's somebody else out there who's already doing that and doing a great job at it, then I certainly want to know that. And I don't know how we actually get a lot of that information to make sure that we're not overfilling some bucket and underfilling another. So I guess that's a question, and I don't know if anybody can answer it, but I do think we have to actually be able to watch that as well, because we don't want to overdo something and underdo something else that we could have helped that was necessary too.
Thanks, Crystal. Yeah, I think just to answer that question, based on the various conversations we've had over the last month, I think it would be maybe not easy, but a request that we can make of the various funders and the institutions to help give us a sense of within Anchorage, because I know there's a broader sort of Alaska one being developed, but at least within the municipality of Anchorage, where are those gaps? Where is the work being done right now? So I think to use the term other folks have been using, so that we're not overflowing any certain bucket.
Mr. Very quickly, Ms. Kaplan.
Felix, can I add on to that?
We should follow up.
Yep. Yes, I have that on my list. Crystal, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what makes a lot of this so difficult, is because we know there's a lot of money out there, and whether or not it's just already private money that organizations have had, there's so many buckets that the state is filling that gets distributed out as well. And to a certain extent, it's not even easy to keep up with where those funds are going to go. So anyway, I guess I'm a little overwhelmed by the idea of trying to track what's being done and how for us to approach it at least slow enough that we can monitor how some of these buckets are being filled, if you will, so that we just don't throw it all out there all at once. So maybe that's something we ought to see how we can consider, so we take the time to really be able to respond and react according to everybody else's timeline of throwing money into buckets. So anyway, it just continues to be problematic, I guess. So I don't have any answer, but thanks.
Thanks. Any other discussion? Okay, so a couple questions then. So do we want to add or remove anything from the list? I guess just based on the conversation earlier and sort of the idea that institutional supports might be incorporated in various other items, is that something that we just want to take out? Especially because no one said it was their top thing for a working group either, so we wouldn't really have anyone working on it.
I agree with you on that.
Well, let me finish that question before we move on. All right, I'm just going to assume, unless anyone objects, that we're okay with that. Okay, so I'm making that assumption. Bam. John?
Yeah, no, it's the institutional one.
John?
Okay, I hope I didn't lose track of where we are in this, but we kind of have a brainstorming list of things that could be done, and I'm sure more could be added. We did get an email from school district today that they wanted 1-point-something million to keep the preschool going for next year, and I don't know if that's appropriate for CARES Act funds or not. But it's an interesting idea that didn't really make it on this list at all. Are you looking for like additional things like that at this time?
So that would be under childcare, John.
Is that on there somewhere?
So childcare is one of the working groups, and so pre-K would be under that.
Okay, so that piece of information would just be, that's for another meeting and it would be under there. Okay.
Yeah, so like I've said, the working groups will determine the tactics. So whether it's pre-K, vouchers, whatever it is.
Okay, good, thanks.
Thanks. Okay, Chris.
Yeah, interesting, that conversation about vouchers, somebody managed to change my mind in the conversation that there are probably better ways to do it. And I definitely sent forward some language to a few folks who came by one of the childcare providers we saw that had a method for ensuring that funds get to children in need through providers that are signed up to the USDA. And so they have to have 25% USDA service vouchers received to qualify for that. And I'm thinking on that conversation that we don't necessarily, or I don't necessarily want us to restrict other providers, but to prioritize those providers on top first that do those services. And then when we get to the end of whatever expenditures we have, if there's money in excess, we might contemplate. But that's for that working group, and I look forward to being on that group. But I don't see under the development with a little note there that that's going to be the work project. And I'm assuming that's the place.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, any other discussion on adding or removing things from the list? I think we've worked this list a lot. Yeah, Austin?
I'll just add that I agree with Chris. I think Megan too, we've been talking about that for instance. I think there are a lot of us who are sort of in line of...
Sorry, you're talking about the vouchers thing?
Yeah,
okay.
Trying to prioritize lower income users of childcare, recognizing that there's broader need as well.
Thanks. Okay, so last question before we move on to the next thing. Does anyone want to revisit their rankings or... Yeah, okay.
So I previously spoke about this, and I know the mayor's here right now, so I'm going to put this on the table that I think there should be an additional category, like a petty cash fund, effectively, that allows the administration to have broad authority to spend up to a certain threshold that we just set aside, that they can utilize for very short-term priorities, that they would report to us in the same way that they would an emergency expenditure within the next meeting, kind of a process. And so I want to add that on here, that we have that conversation, and so it could be as little as $1 million, it could be up to $5 million, but a percentage of these funds that we allow for them to be flexible in quick terms, because we know that these needs are rapidly evolving, and I just think we ought to have that talk. And this didn't come from them, this came from me. When I contemplate how we operate, I just believe that there needs to be some flexibility. They've committed to us not to spend outside of the appropriating process, and I think we should meet them with something that they can be flexible.
Any to chew on that one? Pete?
Thanks, Felix. I think we'd have to come up with a different name, petty cash, $1 million, just.
I understand. I understand.
I'm thinking petty cash, I'm thinking,
But it's flexible money. It's less than 1%. Less than 1%. And so it's $1 out of $100.
All right.
Fair point, Pete.
Any other thoughts on that idea? So
Well,
I guess.
Felix?
Oh, sure. Go ahead,
Felix?
Crystal.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great idea. I just want to echo that. There are some unforeseen things, and so something that we could provide to that flexibility, just to basically cover what we haven't thought of yet. I think that's a great idea.
Thanks, Crystal.
So,
yeah.
One last note on that. They actually could do that today under the emergency orders. And I want to provide them a venue for that, or an outlet for that, so we don't find ourselves in a weird conflict, because we set up a very firm line. And so I want some flexibility for all of us.
Sure.
Thank
So,
you.
how do you envision incorporating that into this work?
So I think it's under the municipal expenses, and I effectively think that they would, for the purposes of that category, I think we should be very generous with what we anticipate the municipal expenses are uncovered that they're going to be. And I've asked Alex, who's now walking out of the room, to develop as best a guess, like kind of a budget of expected costs over the year. But we should separate those dollars out and find ourselves towards the end of the year. Fine, we'll reappropriate them if we haven't spent them. But so it would fall under that category. And that would come as any of the expenses from EOC that aren't covered by FEMA, any of the unanticipated expenses related to the response. And so that's where I would plug it in the context of the buckets that exist.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
So I would recommend renaming institutional, municipal, and I think I'm hearing like, just volunteering.
I thought it was
Because I mean, we have a whole slate of municipal projects and we don't have a municipal category, so let's just take those up under the municipal work group. Because it's got its own lens.
I'll be mindful.
Or volunteering.
Got it. All right. So I guess so in that frame then, adding in, changing institutional to municipal, are we okay with where it sits right now?
Again, I come back to the idea that I had challenges with the way we framed the questions, because many of these are dual priorities, that they don't actually fall into this is number one, this is number two, because they have to happen all at the same time, and so they are equal priorities, in my opinion. So it doesn't really matter in the end how they're scaled to me, because reality has a different flavor.
All right, I will go ahead and move on then to, okay, so I'm going to move on to what Suzanne has called the divide and conquer ranking. So I guess one question I had for the members before we go into general discussion. So generally, the more members in a working group, the longer it takes to do the work, which, I think that's the reality that we live in as a deliberative body. So do we want to try and stick to having a finite amount of people, or do we just want to move forward with, if you express interest with it as one of your tops, then you are going to work on it?
I thought some of these seemed really big, personally.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to talk about what we're thinking about, maybe a little bit more roundtable wise, so that we can see if that's really, if your project even fits within the realm of, or what you're thinking fits within the realm of what everyone else is. Because if it's such an outlier, you may want to spend your energies elsewhere. And for me, I'll be really honest, the housing and childcare issues I saw were to stop immediate issues, but longer term, I'm much more interested in some other areas. I'm happy to contribute and pass on my resources and my contacts, but initially it was just let's stop the bleeding. So that's my comment. So if there was room or need to do childcare, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 members. I would be happy to step back. Same somewhat with housing, depending on what was needed elsewhere.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that question? So we could just go as is, and then folks can realign themselves as maybe they delve into the work more. Are we good just taking that time?
It
Yeah,
seems
awesome.
unrealistic to have the this big of groups. I mean, I'm just thinking about how it sort of practically plays out. So if I email a health, child care expert and get some information like Meg's been doing, and, she could share that with me and Forrest, what she's been doing, and we've been talking. But then I can't then share it with Jamie or whoever else is in the group. Yeah, Jamie and Suzanne, because we're outside. So then do we have to convene a public meeting so that I can tell them I got an email? And, so I just don't think because of the Open Meetings Act it's very practical to have groups this big unless we decide how we're going to divide and conquer. So sorry, I should use that saying. Meg and I have been talking about all the sayings are so lame. It's like, conquer? I don't want to conquer anyone. Okay. So anyway, I don't know, should we pick our top thing and then try to get it down to 3 people in each group? And I think, Meg's point about, Jason brought a proposal forward that Meg and I have been talking with them this morning that they're about to introduce that includes some of these things, including Chris's work project thing and, childcare that we've been talking about before, and I'm sure others have. So it just feels like we're kind of doing, I don't know how to best organize it.
Yeah, go ahead.
So there's the control freak in me is I don't want to let you all take this and create a program, right? And then essentially frame it in such a way that there's no way to change it. I don't mean you personally, but I mean any of these plans. And so I want to be involved in the way we frame all of these because they're important and I want to have my representative voice in the mix. And so there's a challenge to what is the work those small groups are actually going to do, right? That doesn't box out other options that may come up or that anyhow. So I have a parallel concern. It's on the other side of it. Maybe it's unworkable. Maybe it's not what we need. Maybe it is. Maybe there is some work that can be done. We just have to understand what that work is. Because I want to be on every one of these groups. I might submerge some of these, like the housing, childcare, and food. It's kind of might be a wise way to bunch them all together, which are short-term, existential, critical needs. It could be a business and work program. It might be better to slightly massage them. I don't know. And so again, we're just brainstorming here, and I'm not trying to make demands or anything. These are my concerns.
Sure. Any other thoughts?
I'm sort of the opposite. I don't want to be involved in everything because then I think it dilutes my impact and ability to. But I get it. It's so hard. The Open Meetings Act is just really hard in this space. It takes away from our ability to brainstorm together. It's hard.
Yeah. Meg?
My only thought was if we organize these around somewhat our existing committees because of the work we're doing. I mean, this work is not divorced from our everyday work. So, it makes sense for me definitely to be on the homelessness because I know the background, I know the foundational documents, I know what the plan was, and I should know the COVID effects. So some of these might, if we can think about the projects in terms of anything that might have been on our plates in the committees, if you had that foundational piece to it, then that way, I'm really worried that, some of this is emergency response, but I don't want it divorced from so much of what the municipality and our work that we were already doing. I think that's really important. So if folks want to maybe try to put that lens on it a little bit, I know if we were going to undertake a big zoning change, that I would definitely probably want to talk with Mr. Weddleton about that, or have Mr. Weddleton on that, just based on his years of expertise. So I guess I kind of want to really think through some of that kind of, that's another way to maybe discuss it.
Sure. Jeannie?
Thank you, Felix. I think for me, kind of like Chris, I wanted to be involved with most of it all because I feel like every issue does impact our district. And I just want to be able to become that expert in every field so that when I do discuss things with my community, I know exactly what I'm talking about. So I'd like to be involved with each and every one of them. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. John?
I don't have time to be involved with all of them. But I'm looking at this. I think the notion, what would we do in these committees is still kind of out there. And I'm just thinking, my thinking is, we kind of divide up and under these categories. Well, who are the stakeholders, and kind of define that. And then what are their needs? Like where Chris has said, well, the food bank's actually doing quite well. So we say, okay, well, maybe not them. And then kind of list, okay, within that, kind of broad category, what are the other sources of funds. You know, we may look like a business. Okay, well, there's a lot of federal funds. There may be more coming. We will maybe fill a few holes there. You know, what other resources are there for that category? And then what's the best way to help? And, you know, like we talked about vouchers, you know, grants or loans or whatever it might be. And if in each of these categories, whoever's on the team just kind of says, okay, well, let's gather that information and then come back together as a group and say, okay, for each of these categories, we've got this, and then start prioritizing. Then it's, you know, it's not like, you know, our favorite, you know, it's not the divide and conquer, you know, it's sharing information. We divide and conquer all together later.
Thanks. Chris?
Yeah, so I come back to rip on what Meg just said, and that is that we should put it in the context of our current work as much as possible. Committee and the strategic plan, I know we're hammering on that a little bit. We have 4 planks to that plan, and we should try, if we can, to either do that or our committee structure. I think it's really wise to do that. And I would offer, I would have put my name under the homelessness category, except I was still picked 4. And, you know, so I had to triage it. I would happily take myself out of child care, but I want to make sure we're careful with those dollars. So it's hard to narrow down where the best number is spent.
Any other discussion on this? Crystal?
Thanks, Felix. Yeah, I guess the way I looked at it is I was trying to recognize my limitation just in terms of time or expertise. And so I purposefully really limited myself to 3 categories anyway. I'm happy to move around within whatever, but I tried to kind of highlight not only the ones that I was interested in, but the ones that just made more sense for me. So anyway, you know, if we need to shift them around, if that's the idea, then I'm happy to move into something else if that's appropriate. Thanks.
Thanks.
Hey, Felix.
Suzanne, go ahead.
Thanks, Felix. Okay, so I did use the phrase divide and conquer, and all that I meant by that was seeking to maximize efficiency. Some of us have full-time jobs and other family responsibilities, and while I would love to be running down details on every, you know, single issue, you know, I simply cannot do that and do it well. So I also fall into the camp of focusing, but my assumption was that these subgroups or committees would not necessarily be making any decisions, but would be doing research and bringing information back to the group. So by participating in the structure, we are not necessarily giving up any control, because like everything we do, it's subject to editing or amendments or you know, whatever format the changes will take. So you can, in fact, since no one had signed up for institutions, and I know we got rid of it, I was going to volunteer for that one because the groups I ended up in are quite large, and I would just as soon, for some of the reasons that Austin mentioned, be in a smaller group because I think it's more agile, and the whole point of giving this money directly to communities is so we can be quick and not get bogged down. So I'm very flexible about you know, where I'm assigned, because all these areas are very important to me, so you can stick me wherever. Thanks.
Thanks, Suzanne. So I guess I'll go ahead and jump in. And so not in the version that we had before us, because I took it out to shorten the document, but in the original version that everyone used, the description before the ranking for working groups basically stated that these groups are meant to work with both the administration and the various funders and community partners to come up with outcomes, tactics, and funding mechanisms, come up with all of those ideas, do the research that it takes to do all of that, and then bring that back to the group who in the end is the decider. So some of that work can be done through the committee structure. I just worry that the committees already have so much on their plate already. I just don't see, unless you guys want to do 3-hour committee meetings, being able to put all of this kind of work in committees. I do like the idea, though, if we just want to sort of scratch this idea of doing working groups per the different rankings, we could just do working groups that mirror the assembly priorities, in which case it would be 4, in which case I could imagine 4 members working on each one. I just want to sort of try to push away from this idea of all 11 of us being on each one, because I think that stops us from being more nimble and agile in terms of how we want to move forward with thinking about the money. And I think we, at least right now, need to be nimble in the short term, and then maybe later we can develop a different process when we're thinking about the transformative work that we want to do. So I guess there's just a lot to chew on for this conversation of how we want to do the work. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
So that there underscores a challenge to how I've been thinking about this. Transformative work to me isn't priority number 3 or later. It starts today. It starts at the same time all these projects do. That's the challenge, right? It's like we have the critical things to take care of in housing, jobs, and child care. We also have the transformative work, the fire mitigation, all that other stuff. And it doesn't wait until tomorrow. It starts now as well. So I hope people understand when we say that it's not about looking forward and doing things down the road that will change, but we have to start now. And one thought that keeps coming to mind, and I know we're all busy, is perhaps we do some kind of a notice deal like we did with when we set our priorities, where we collectively gather per day, do some round robining around these topic areas, maybe in small groups, and then we bring the groups back together and report. Get it up on the board, little yellow tabs, little stickies, these are the ways, and then finally we kind of resolve around the moment. These are our broadest targeted priorities, to the point of getting specific enough to do something. Somebody sent me an email with a list of 5. These are the things we're actually going to do. Look, it was super crisp and thoughtful. If we could just get to there in a one major step, I think we would be close.
I guess I do want us to get to that. I just don't think it's going to be as easy to get to that. Because then that requires, at least from my perspective, if we want to talk about just sticking to child care, tactics, well, what outcomes are we looking for? And then talking about bringing all of those people in, it just, for me, it makes more sense to do that kind of sort of investigative work through the lens of some smaller group that can bring it to the larger. So I think I agree that eventually we need to get to that place where we reconvene and have this long meeting where we are doing the stickering and we are looking at all of the work that everyone has done, and we are prioritizing based on all of that work. I just don't know if that's necessarily where we start from. But this has been a helpful discussion that I think we're not going to necessarily wrap up today, although I was hoping we'd be able to get moving. But Crystal.
Thanks, Felix. I guess my concern in all of this, it seems like we're dragging things out so long. I don't know that we have the time to do a lot of this. I mean, I was kind of taken aback by how long it took just for the municipality to set up some kind of a distribution system with the funds that we approved for both the rental assistance and for the business grants. So my concern is the longer we take to do this, even especially if it's like with trying to get the Firewise or the trail maintenance programs up and running, or whatever we come up with. I mean, we're talking a good month out before any of that money would even actually get into people's hands. So to a certain extent, we'll run out of time you know, to even do that. And I was talking to our Parks and Rec director, and she said she would love to have trails people, and she's actually been trying to hire for over a month already. And so she said it's been dragging on in HR for her to get people, and part of that is because people aren't really running out to take on jobs when they've got unemployment. But anyway, the whole problem with all of this taking so much time and knowing that it's going to even take longer for money to get distributed for a lot of these ideas, I have real concerns about how we do this in a way that actually gets money to places where it needs to be now. So, thanks.
Thanks. Meg?
Thanks. So I went and looked at the assembly priorities quick. And some of them fit and some of them don't. So we have economic development. That actually fits multiple categories. So we kind of lump some of it together and there'd be a real conversation. Homelessness would actually encompass most of the things that I'm like most passionate about, because it also involves substance misuse and mental health. I mean, and I feel like, you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, that's my highest and best use in this body in terms of pulling together something to bring forward and discuss. I mean, I guess that's what I want to do, is I want to make sure that I'm involved wherever my highest and best use is, because in my mind, whatever we put forward in these areas needs to think about all the different categories and then have kind of like a plan for it. So maybe there's something immediate, maybe there's something midterm, and then there maybe is something, you know, longer term, and kind of architect that work and bring it forward. I think you have to really dig deep in some of these areas. I mean, in some ways, this is giving us an opportunity, if we can kind of hold some of the other press of business to really do some policy these appropriations are more than just money. These are a policy direction that have real substantial effects. So, I mean, I would love breathing room to dig in super deep on homelessness, mental health, substance abuse, and how does that help? How can we really do something? We have one piece of that, a foundational piece, but how do we really drive it forward? I can't do that work, though, and then be involved in anything else. I mean, that's, I think, the reality of it. But I would want regular updates so that I could keep my constituents informed when they're saying, hey, I'm really interested in X, Y, and Z. What are you guys going to do about that? So I'm actually willing to step back from all of it, but really one area. So.
Thanks. Forrest?
Thank you. And I actually just wanted to identify with Member Kennedy's remarks. Juneau, for example, has already have already rolled out several of their plans for what they are going to do with their CARES Act money. It's not all finalized, but they seem to be significantly further down the road than we are. And I understand that we wanted to really dig in deep to a lot of these issues, and we did. We heard from a lot of folks. But I do feel that we are a bit behind the 8 ball here. I was hoping that the administration would have their proposal to us before the start of this meeting. I think we're going to get something by the end of the day, certainly on the addendum, and that should help clarify us and clarify our thinking, and we'll have something to sort of bounce ideas off of, and we will amend or not amend that thing. But I'm very appreciative of the idea this could be a transformative moment, and we want to go in really deep on some of these really interesting long-term ideas. At the same time, I think we do need to not let perfect be the enemy of the good when it comes to things like rental assistance and to a lesser extent childcare, which might take a little more finessing, but trying to get this funding out onto the street quickly. And so again, as Crystal said, I think we need to actually start pulling some triggers pretty soon. And to the degree to which that's hampered by the work task force system or however you envision it, then I think we should try to not allow that to delay us. I'd also say that I like Chris's idea of getting us all in a room and trying to hammer these things out. I don't know if we have time to do that either in some cases, but if we do go down that road, obviously it's something I'm happy to participate in. Thank you.
Thanks. Chris?
Yeah, so I think that if it's possible, the administration might brief us on what they're proposing for tonight to be introduced for a meeting on Tuesday, because I think it does set some priorities and I think most of us will agree. And that, back to this argument of all of us finding more experts to come in. I'm, for my part, done hearing from experts. I want to hear from you. We've heard from 15, 20, 25 hours worth of experts in this conversation, and we've heard and heard and heard. And so I think, personally, it's time for us to make the hard calls that need to be made. And I understand that there are other opinions on that topic, but I know everybody's priority is the most important thing that we can do today. And it's time for us to make those tough calls. So Jason, I would like to hear if you're prepared.
Hold on, Chris. I have him on the agenda, don't worry. Pete.
Thank you, Felix. And I think, a point that I think needs to be made is, we need to get this funding out there, reverberating and growing our economy. There's a multiplying factor. The longer we wait, the longer it takes to get this money started circulating. And so, it would be great if we could get this distributed perfectly, but I think we're better off doing it sooner than later. And the idea of trying to be too perfect is that concept makes perfect sense to me. Let's be 80% right, but get something started and get moving.
Thanks, Pete. Okay, any other final thoughts on this before we move on? Okay, I can't tell you exactly how this is all going to look, but I will put together a few different ideas for us to consider. I do agree with Crystal and with Forrest, though. I have been hoping we'd be able to move slightly quicker and at least starting to dive into these. And I think we're just at the cusp of being able to do so. And my goal is to move us there as quickly as possible. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and use these last 10 minutes to turn it over to Jason to talk about some of the proposals from the administration, which, if you listen to the mayor's community briefing, you heard some of those. So, Jason.
Thank you, Felix, and I will run through the proposal that the administration is going to be putting forward. I will add that Member Zalatow and Davidson and Constant have signed on as co-sponsors of this. They, as every member has provided a lot of input and help into getting us to this point. So I will start by saying if any other members, once we get through with this, want to sign on as co-sponsors, we certainly welcome that. So with that, I'll run through kind of what the proposal is going to look like, and again, it will be on the addendum. First, we are going to propose an additional $5 million into a small business and nonprofit relief program. It's essentially what we originally did with the pilot program. I think we've learned a lot. For those that might not know, during just the application process for the $1 million, we received over 700 applications for that money, and we're only able to push out grants to 120 businesses. So the vast majority of those that applied were not able to be funded. Everyone can probably has read that the state is having some difficulty in pushing out their money, so there is still an extreme need for a lot of these small businesses and nonprofits. So we would propose that $5 million be put back into this program. I believe we will likely be relaxing some of the restrictions that we had put in place for the original $1 million. Essentially, we did not allow anyone that had received or applied for any other federal assistance, be the PPP or the EIDL. They were deemed ineligible. We'll likely try to take a look at that, potentially loosen some of those restrictions to allow more to apply. The second one is, again, replenishing the original fund that the Assembly has already approved for rental and mortgage assistance. If you remember, the Assembly approved $1 million for this pilot program. It has now gone live. I will tell you the numbers as I know them right now. During just the first 2 days of people calling, we had already referred over 300 people to receive some sort of payment. So there's obviously a very big need when it comes there. We are hopeful that obviously with the announcement that AHFC also has a program of $10 million, that a lot of these we're going to work in concert with AHFC to make sure that after June 30th, hopefully we will be able to hit most of the individuals that might be subject to some sort of eviction process. Once the June 30th and that moratorium on evictions leaves. So we'd like to ask for an additional $2 million to make sure that we're covered there. The third program, and one that I think is of great interest to both the administration and everyone on the Assembly, from the best I can tell, is a child care relief program. We're going to propose $10 million to be put into this program. I know there's a lot of interest in making sure that there is, at the very least, some sort of priority given to those providers that have remained open and that serve low-income families. We are certainly interested in that, and we are working very diligently with the health department and folks that oversee our child care licensing program to try to figure out how do we best effectuate that and make sure that we're getting that money into those providers' hands. And then the final one for this first round is a public lands jobs program. We're proposing $3 million for that. And essentially what that would be is two major initiatives. The first one, I think, is we've talked a lot about, is trying to get people to work on helping clear out some high priority fire areas that have a lot of spruce beetle trees that are dead, and working on that. And then the second initiative focuses in on a lot of shovel-ready soft service trail maintenance and improvements around the municipality. So this program, I think, is, as Mr. Dunbar alluded to, is quite similar to what Juneau has done. We're proposing to put more in it than Juneau has at this point. So when you add all of these up, this proposal totals $20 million, and that is what we're going to be asking for. We're certainly open to having additional members join as co-sponsors or having conversations about what additional items we might want to include at some point.
Thanks. Okay, so I have myself, Forrest, and Meg. Can you remind me what was the number on the rental?
An additional $2 million.
Got it. And then, yes, if you could add me as a co-sponsor, that would be great. Forrest?
Thank you. Jason, two questions. The first on the $5 million for small business and nonprofits. When we rolled out, shortly after we rolled out this pilot program, a number of us asked about the collection of demographic data for who was receiving it, because I think there is a worry that this program would end up being inequitable in the same way that the PPP was, where Black and other indigenous-owned businesses were not getting what we had hoped, not getting a proportionate percentage of the payout. So I guess, first of all, do you have that demographic information? And if you don't, can you get it to us by Tuesday before we vote on this for what the results of the pilot program were?
Yes, let me.
Mr. Chairman, this is Chris Judy. I'll answer that one. The short answer through the chair to Member Dunbar is that we don't have the demographic or the survey responses from the initial program complete at this time. We are our contractor is just now finishing the disbursements. As you recall, the applications were all self-certified, and then once selected, they had to go through verification. And so Cook Lending's been working with individuals on those verifications and just now wrapping those up. So we probably won't have that info for you by Tuesday, but it's getting close. I believe if the last check didn't go out today, it's going out soon. So we're getting close to the end.
Can I have a follow-up to that, Mr. Rivera?
Sure.
Sure. So I think I maybe perhaps a little rashly, I promised I wouldn't vote for additional funding for this program until we had that information when it first went out, shortly after we put it out. I really think that's valuable. Maybe you won't have a detailed, maybe you won't have detailed information on it, but if you could have even preliminary data on even a sense of this did not run into the same program that the PPP did by Tuesday night, I would really appreciate it. Because again, I am very comfortable voting for something if we don't really know how the pilot program went. And also I would note that this is an administration priority, but I think it ended up being pretty low on the list of the assembly priorities relative to things like child care relief and rental assistance. And that brings me to my second point, my second question for Mr. Bockenstadt. Why only $2 million for rental assistance? It seems like the need will be much greater, and I think that is either the number one or number two priority as expressed by myself and my colleagues, many of my colleagues.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I would just say that this is only kind of a first pass. I think as we go into the summer and fall months, if additional funding is necessary, I think the administration is certainly open to putting more in. But as I mentioned, our program with $1 million just went live earlier this week. So we still have some there, and then AHFC has $10 million. So we're not wanting to overcommit too much at this point, but we are certainly open if the need becomes quite apparent going into the coming months of adding more into it.
Thank you. I'll just say there, it's true that AHFC has a $10 million program. It's also true the state has a $290 million program for small business and nonprofits. And, God willing, it will start to operate appropriately in the next couple weeks. So I mean, if I had my druthers, we would flip the small business and the rental mortgage assistance amounts. But I appreciate this package. I appreciate the package that's been put forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Before I move on in the queue, can I get a motion to extend 10 minutes? Is there a second? Second. Okay, any opposition? All right. Meg?
Thank you. Excuse me. I want to kind of have a conversation, and I think it's good that we have it with Jason here, is about which of these CARES Act appropriations are we going to put forward to public hearing? Because we haven't talked about that. So far, all of them are coming directly before the body, and we're not setting them out, saying, okay, now here it's introduced, and then we're going to have a public hearing in 2 weeks. Some of them are urgent, and I get that. But I guess I would like us to at least put it on our radar to think about if we have some kind of philosophical agreement about when that should be happening. What areas, are they the longer term projects? Are they, I don't know, but I'm really wanting to make sure that we are getting public feedback on these appropriations as they're going out, and not, and some of it, I mean, we worked really, really hard, and we got this one into the addendum, and it took a lot of time to kind of get all the pieces together, but now we have 4 days to discuss it with the public. And I really want, people to know what we're doing and why we're doing it. So I just wanted to throw that out there. It's kind of been sitting with me. My talking point on the $2 million for housing is we know we have about $1.8 million in rental forbearance payments that could come due. So to me, that makes sense, and we've got that data to put out there. But I don't know if 4 days is enough time to say that's why it's logical and reasonable. So I really want to make sure we figure that out.
Thanks, John.
Oh, thanks. Put some points on a couple of these, and money to help businesses and the nonprofits means money for jobs so people have money so they can pay their rent with that money, as opposed to direct rent assistance. So I think it's kind of the point Mr. Dunbar made is to flip those two. It's kind of the natural order of things. I mean, giving money to business is giving money to people for jobs, which is really what we need to do. And then on to Jason, the on childcare, so I guess we'll see how that's done. But I wonder if they looked at ways to decrease childcare costs. Like they need more space. So I was kind of thinking, okay, well, open up schools at least through the summer for them. Then they can have space and they can run their operations in schools, or maybe doing some way, we're feeding kids at schools now. I think they're bringing lunches, to maybe do that at child cares or something like that. I imagine there's a whole variety of things I couldn't even think of. But did you look at that stuff, Jason?
Yes, and I will add, thank you for actually jogging my memory on this. I told Nicole Lebo that I would actually mention this, that one of the things that our folks at AHD are having conversations about with a lot of the licensed facilities is, the summertime right now it's actually a little bit easier for a lot of these facilities to space people out because they can spend more time outside during the summertime. But one of the conversations that we are having is what will we do as we move into the fall and winter months, and we have to have the kids inside a lot more. So we are having conversations about what type of, or is there additional money that we can put forward to help them with some capital projects to potentially build out within their facility some more closed off areas or things like that. So I'm just putting that on the radar, that is part of the discussion that is happening about how do we handle that. But that is kind of where we are right now.
Thanks.
Good, thank you.
Dean?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to mention the time we should take care of that, or but I do have a quick question about the total amount mandated by the resolution for Tuesday night.
20 million.
So there's a lot left to discuss in the public support.
Okay, thanks. Chris?
Yeah, thanks. So, say this again, every dollar spent on a bag of cement capital project is a dollar not going into somebody's mouth for food, especially if the supplies were purchased from Canada or China or wherever. So, and if we find ourselves in the fall with schools shut down and we're investing in capital expansion, we should do, as the proposal was in the notes here, figure out a way to leverage ASD facilities that are empty for these kind of uses rather than repurchase, and make these massive capital investments away from dollars for people to work. I think we have to be very careful to put people to work as much as possible. That for sure is my priority, and that's, it's the man to fish, that kind of a thing, instead of just doing this one-time expenditure. I think that I would argue we could flip some of these categories, might add some to the categories that are there. To Ms. Elito's point about when do we go to the public for a public hearing on this, some of the items will require that we do that, but maybe what we do once we do have a chance to sit around and finalize our priorities, is we afford a resolution of our priorities and have that be the thing that people hammer on and give us their input on. Because when it comes down to emergency expenditures, I think that we are making them as they come. We'll do our best to get strategic, but we should leave ourselves the flexibility for that. We can't give the public a clear statement of where we're going to spend the money.
Thanks. That was one of the things I was going to ask everyone to do a roundtable about. So I have Chris's answer. So any other discussion on this? All right, so we don't really have time for more, unfortunately. So we are going to go ahead and move on to audience participation. Do we have anyone on the line that's not an assembly member?
We do, Mr. Chair, but they may be people that are waiting for the next work session.
Okay. So are there any members of the public who are on the line that would like to speak at this committee meeting? once, twice. Okay, thanks everyone.
Before we adjourn, can I add one last thing to the table, separate topic? I would like us to consider making Juneteenth a municipal holiday for next year.
Is that a mustache?
Thanks.